morning, and welcome to the 938 podcast here at the BBFI Missions Office in Springfield, Missouri. I've got with me by way of Zoom this morning, all the way from New Zealand, Dalton Walker, missionary to New Zealand. Welcome to the program, Dalton.
Good to be with you, Brother Steve.
Dalton, how many years have you been in New Zealand? I had a brain cramp there and forgot.
Well, I think Paulette and I were looking at stuff the other day, and we're on our 25th volume of newsletter. So from the time that we headed out on deputation, it would be 25. So 24 years actually here.
24 years. Wow,
Yeah.
That's wonderful. So you and your wife Paulette are there in Havelock North, is it?
Havelock North, which is an area of Hastings, New Zealand. Yep.
Wonderful. Well, I'm glad that you were able to join us. It's your morning there in New Zealand and our afternoon here in Springfield. You know, I was just wondering and had to get that information about 24, 25 years of missionary service. You know, what was it that touched your heart that made you surrender to the field of missions and service for the Lord?
Right. You know, my mentor taught a lot on missions, and I grew up in BBFI churches hearing about missions. And so I had already been in the ministry for a couple of decades, and I took a mission trip and came here and got a real burden for the people, and did family conferences and conferences with some of our missionaries who were here at the time, and went back and wrestled with it for a couple of years. Finally, we brought about 18 people on an evangelistic team here for about 2.5 weeks to finally put it to bed and just say, surely it's just a love for missions. And within the first week that we came back on this trip,
so that vision trip, so to speak, it finalized in your heart and mind that it wasn't just an emotional thing, that it was an actual call of God.
Yep.
Wow. Well, that's wonderful. When you and Paulette decided to go to New Zealand as missionaries, you had some children at home, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
How many children?
We had 3 sons at home.
Wow. Well, what effect did that have? How old were your boys, and what effect did it have on them moving to New Zealand as missionaries?
Well, for one, it was difficult in the beginning.
Uh-huh.
The other 2 were excited, but our Andrew, our oldest, and I talked to him about this, made sure it was okay. It was more difficult for him. He was at that 16, 17-year-old mark. Sure. And he was going to go to BBC, but it came at a very difficult time for him. We had tremendous friends in our church there in Montana, and so it was difficult for him. And finally, over the next 2 or 3 years, he would come to realize it was the best decision that he had ever made. And he has been one of our greatest supporters and helpers while we've been here in New Zealand. That's
great. That's often the case when children are older and their parents surrender to go to the mission field. Yeah. They may not sense that same burden and calling of God, but they go along with their parents, and I think it's the godly influence of parents like you and Paulette that make a difference in their lives and help them to adjust.
Man, they're proud of us.
Good. When you guys first arrived in New Zealand, what were some of your memorable experiences?
It was raining. Every time I've come in and out of an airport in Auckland, it's raining.
Yeah.
I think the biggest problem in the cross-cultural adaptation to New Zealand was that when you come, because it is English speaking at first glance, you think that wow, this is a lot like maybe California. And I've watched people go through that. I've got a couple that's going through it right now, and they've arrived here from America. And so that throws you off. Psychological studies have shown that it's more difficult to go to an English speaking country in some ways because your mind dismisses all the things you should be paying attention to because they speak English. So it's a different English
Yeah.
and it's a different way of thinking, um, tremendously different. And when you read the newspapers, you can't even understand the things they're talking about, not just historically, anthropologically, geographically, but you can't understand the words they're using that are plain English and the way they put the words together in looking at it.
It's a difficult mind game to play because
Right.
it appears like it could be, like you said, a culture in Southern California or any part of the United States, but yet the culture is so totally different
Yep.
that you have to make that. So, what was the greatest need that you first recognized, maybe spiritually, when you arrived there in New Zealand?
The right presentation of the gospel. New Zealand's very religious. As a matter of fact, there are 162, the last we checked, cultures here in New Zealand that all have their own religions. And so, for those that would talk about Christ, they don't recognize him or perhaps their potential or ability to get saved. So, when you
Mm.
talk to people about Christ, it's like beating a dead horse in a lot of ways. And of course, that goes with most European countries. It is an extremely difficult mission field, but not without the power of God. That's one of the assumptions that you can make if you're not careful. And I think we've made that before. And so, just here recently, during all the lockdowns and everything, we've been seeing people get saved. And they've been
Amen.
coming to a place for the first time in New Zealand. See, New Zealand's never had to fight for their own freedom. They've never had difficult things like that. It's socialism moving to communism now. And so the government's always been there to take care of everything. But now people are going through difficult times where the government perhaps they're realizing they're on their own and they're realizing, I mean, it's like this is the time for us here in New Zealand, is what my wife and I have been talking about.
Uh, have you found that the people are maybe a little bit more receptive to listening and
Yes,
to embracing the gospel of
yes,
Jesus Christ?
yeah. They're thinking more about eternity because of their mortality. We are in, without getting into politics, we're in a fear campaign here, night and day. Media blockout or blackout and media bombardment 24/7 of fear for 2.5 years. I mean, in everything, every newspaper, and people are limited on what they can and can't say. And so now people are seeing and hearing that death is all around them. And so people are starting to line up, at our door, so to speak. And Brother Steve, this has been the greatest time of our ministry here in New Zealand.
Wow. I was going to ask you, do you see this as all of the 25 years before, not to
Yeah.
negate any of that, but it prepared you for this time to,
And we've talked about that very thing. We said
yeah,
it's like all of the years before makes sense now. And it was
wow.
a steep learning curve. But now we're seeing where all of it is paid off. We were set for the time.
Well, what's the population of New Zealand? Do you know that off the top of your head?
Well, we've recently learned a big lesson. 5 million people.
5 million.
Well, the lesson we've learned is that 1 million of them have been outside of New Zealand. So I don't think most people I've polled knew that there's really 6 million New Zealanders.
Goodness. Well, I guess that would lead me to the question, do you need some help?
Oh, do you see these gray hairs? When we first came to New Zealand, there was a spattering of missionaries, and you and I have had this talk before. Um, New Zealand made it very difficult. As a matter of fact, if you'll research it, it is one of the most difficult open countries to get into for a
Right.
missionary. And for a long time, I think that I've had a view we can't get missionaries in. And then we watched God do something. It hadn't materialized yet, but we heard about some other missionaries that were coming to New Zealand.
Mm.
And we said, how's that happening? We heard about it for a year. Finally, we found where they were at, got a hold of them. They're Canadian. So because
Really?
they're from a Commonwealth, these are missionaries that were trained at Bible colleges in the U.S., and they're able to get in now to New Zealand. And so we started realizing there are ways. I have an American man that's joined me, but he married a Maori woman going to Bible college in America. And she had left when she was a young lady playing netball. And so she comes back understanding who we are, but also learning her people, the Maori here. And he's American with tremendous capabilities. And it's just like a marriage made in heaven. So God did it another way. See, they came in as health attendants to her father, who's just passed away this week. And he does our Wednesday nights for us.
Well, you know,
So
that just
I've
proves
realized God's not limited.
that's exactly right. It just proves that when we think that there may not be a way, that God says, "Let me just show you what I can do.
Yeah.
I can open the doors." You know, and that brings us to the whole focus of our challenge and podcast, the 938 challenge. In the mission office, we instituted last year the 938 Project 938. Stemming from Matthew chapter 9 and verse 38, when Jesus gave this special prayer request to his disciples. And he said, "Pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest, that he would put forth laborers into the harvest." And truly, as we look around, we see a great need for laborers, not just in missions, but in every aspect of Christian service. But we focus on missions because we look at the mission fields, the countries around the world like New Zealand that need helpers. And I'm sure that your people have been praying for more laborers as well, haven't you?
Yes, they have. And yes, we're participating too in the 938 in October, and leading up to it, we're
Great.
participating in it. We want
You
our
know,
people to be actively involved in it.
people can go to our website at project938.world and download all kinds of resources to help them promote this in their churches, to resources to know how to pray. In fact, this video will be broadcast on our YouTube channel and different outlets, but it will also, be available for people to download and view in their churches, and call attention to the need of laborers in New Zealand and all of Oceania.
Tremendous need. We have
How,
lost so many missionaries since I've been here, Brother Steve, and none of them have been replaced.
tell me some ways that people could be involved in the ministry there in New Zealand.
First of all, by praying. I believe in the power of prayer.
Amen.
So many times, I've recently changed our newsletter just simply because so many things we've asked people to pray for have been answered. Souls saved, families straightened out, buildings. Our folks meet for 6 months. They met in cow patties, cow pastures.
Yeah.
And it was kind of a biblical setting. We had sheep and cows around us. And just 2 weeks ago, the school called us and said, "We want you to come back." And it was all because of the COVID thing. And tremendous relationship with the school. So now we have these beautiful facilities, and look what God did. And it was through a partnership of prayer. And so many times with health issues or financial issues or whatever, prayer is the number one. We need to pray to the Lord to help send laborers to all of Oceania
Amen.
and
Yes.
New Zealand specifically, as far as we're concerned. We need helpers that understand commitment and faith in God.
You know, Dalton, I'm a firm believer that God has not stopped calling people uh, to the mission fields around the world, to the pastorate in the United States, and to just be laborers in their local churches.
Yes.
But I believe that people have quit surrendering
Yeah.
and to that call of God. So they could surrender. They could go to the mission field physically and labor alongside you. Um, you know, and
Wow.
then also they can, if God's not called them to go there or some other place, they can always support financially. You've already mentioned prayer, and that's the primary way, I believe.
Primary.
But support financially through their local church. Supporting missionaries like you and Paulette and others that are in New Zealand and in other countries around the world. They can
So
give.
support's tremendous. I want to say something, Brother Steve, if I have the time, and that is this. It's a series that I'm doing right now, and this very project type of thing is what led me into it. And so I want to give a challenge to people, and that is this. I don't think our faith as Christians is what it used to be. I
Mm.
don't. I think we all need to do a good, strong reading of Hebrews 11. And we need to look at that early church. Everybody wants the power of the early church, and no one wants to do what the early church did. And so that's sacrifice. That's give. That's go. And to value the things of the eternal more than the comforts of this world. I think a lot of missionaries have been lost to the American dream. And I'm not putting anyone down, not condemning anyone. I'm just saying we need more heroes of the faith for other people to see today.
Amen. That's so true, and I appreciate having a personal friendship with you and Paulette and your boys too, and just having that relationship. And I will certainly be praying with you, and I appreciate you leading your church to join in on October the 2nd, 2022, which is we're designated as Project 938 Sunday. That's the day that we concertedly all together pray to the Lord of the harvest, but obviously we ask people to pray daily, that God would call people and those that he calls would surrender. And well, Dalton, I appreciate you getting with us on this morning and spending some time. It's always good to connect, and thankful that God has given us this technology that we can use to be together even though we're thousands of miles apart. So what would you say in closing to the men and women and young people that are listening to you today?
Most challenging time of my life has been as a missionary. Most rewarding time has been being a missionary. I'm a crybaby. Look to the end, not the now. We need to focus more on the eternal and give God everything we've got and be willing to be used by him, and not just send people who are, but be willing ourselves to be used by God to go and tell other people about Jesus Christ.
Well, Dalton, I couldn't say it any plainer or any clearer. You've laid a challenge out for us, and I pray that every man, boy, woman, daughter, girl that was listening to this podcast would take that to heart and would really search themselves and say, God, am I doing what you want me to do? whether it's to go, whether it's to be more involved here where I'm at. So thank you for joining us, and
My
we will be
pleasure.
looking forward to seeing you soon, and looking forward to October the 2nd for Project 938 Sunday. And I want to thank the people that are listening for joining us, and pray that you would be involved as well and see what God wants you to do. May God bless you guys.